There's no Powerball or whatever up to this high, but last year that reached a record 1.6 billion. And along with the record size also came a record number of people playing. So what we're going to talk about today is the lotteries, and we're going to watch one with John Oliver here.
The lottery. It's the second best use of magic marker on ping pong balls after Kermit the Frog's eyes. Now, this past week saw a huge Mega Millions draw.
A big winning lottery ticket was sold in New York. Lots of people around here have been peeking at their lottery tickets this morning.
The Mega Millions mystery this evening, that $321 million jackpot. The search for the winner is on tonight.
Well, the winner shouldn't be too hard to find. If someone at your work this week marched in and told everyone to go for themselves before flipping their desk over and storming out, that's probably your winner right there. But don't worry if you didn't hit the jackpot. You will frankly have an unbelievable number of other opportunities to play. 44 states currently have lotteries, and you can't have missed the commercials featuring everything from a ping pong ball thunderstorm to a furry dressed as a cat playing with a ball of money to a weird lucky man who for some reason decided to spend his lottery winnings terrifying a penguin by taking a hang gliding. That is a bizarrely specific use of a big lottery win. Look, if my numbers come up, I'm strapping a penguin to my chest and I'm taking to the skies. You evolution, I decide who flies. That's my choice. My choice. Lottery commercials. Lottery commercials are incredibly seductive, and they're also everywhere. States spend $500 million on them every year, and the reason they do that is that the lottery is a massive moneymaker for them.
Last year alone, lottery sales totaled about $68 billion.
68 billion. That's more than Americans spent last year on movie tickets, music, porn, the NFL, Major League Baseball, and video games combined. Which means Americans basically spent more on the lottery than they spent on America. And if you think about it, it's a little strange for the government to be running what is basically a gigantic gambling business. But we don't think about lotteries like that, perhaps because they're sold to us more as charitable foundations.
$3 billion for education opens a lot of doors. The Tennessee Lottery, game-changing, life-changing fun.
Education matters to Oregonians. That's why over $5 billion in lottery dollars have gone to support public education. The Oregon Lottery, it does good things.
Every time you play a New York lottery game, a portion of your sale goes to aid New York State school children, just like them. New York Lottery, everybody wins.
Thank you for being a friend. Those ads are basically implying that anyone who does not play the lottery is selfish. Hey, what do you want to educate these harmonizing children, you fucking monster? So let's take a look at those slogans. Everybody wins, the lottery does good things, and it's game-changing, life-changing fun. Is it, does it, and do they? Let's start with the basics. The lottery generates $68 billion in sales a year. So where does that money come from?
Over the course of the last 2 decades, multiple studies have found lower-income households spend a higher percentage of their money on lottery tickets.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense. Lots of people like to gamble, and for lower-income households, the lottery is an affordable way to do it. But generally, when wealthy people want to take risks with their money, they either choose to invest in the stock market or they leave their wife for Amber without signing a prenup, because Amber's forever. Besides, she just gets you. She's a little tiring, but she'll be there. The lottery is in the business of selling people hope, and they do a great job of that.
Start a college fund for our kids. Start a college fund for their kids. A game with jackpots worthy of your dreams. Mega Millions. Dream mega.
That feels like an ad for a mutual fund. But crucially, the lottery is not an investment, because it's worth mentioning that those mega dreams are mega unlikely to happen.
What are the real chances of winning? A lousy 1 in 176 million.
Winning the Mega Millions is akin to getting struck by lightning at the same time you're being eaten by a shark.
The bad report card. The percentage of state spending on education is down or flat in 21 of those states, from coast to coast.
Lotteries provided no additional funding for education in 21 out of 24 states. As math students in one of those places would put it, that is nearly 50%. How is this possible? Well, look, let's just look at North Carolina. Their governor inaugurated the North Carolina Education Lottery nearly a decade ago with big promises.
When the lottery is fully implemented, we'll be adding another $500 million annually for education.
$500 million extra, that sounds great. You'd think by now all North Carolina preschoolers would be strutting around in fine bespoke suits, quoting Nietzsche and Kierkegaard. But in fact, North Carolina currently spends less per student on education than it did when the lottery even began. And if you're thinking, how the f*** is that possible? It's because money in state budgets tends to move around a lot. Trying to add money just for one purpose is a bit like trying to piss in one corner of a swimming pool. It's going all over the place, no matter what you play. Let me give you just a narrow example. In 2012, North Carolina used $100 million of lottery money for school construction, but that didn't mean the school construction budget was $100 million bigger than it would have been, because while that money was flowing in, other money was flowing out.
A portion of corporate income taxes used to go toward construction, but when the lottery passed, that tax money went away, substituted with lottery revenue.
And where did that corporate tax money go? Who knows? There's not even a warm spot where it once was. but if...
All right, it's a good kind of introduction to this. Add some stats to what he's talking about. Here's a breakdown of incomes in the U.S. 50th percentile, meaning this is the portion of people above and below these income levels. And so the bottom 20th percent, that's going to be right around here. I don't know what number that is. It's not a lot of money, though. Right? We can agree on that. Income-wise, it's I don't want to say sorry, because that's a value judgment. It's a sorry income level, right? At the bottom 20%, and this particular statistic comes from a phone survey in a particular state where state lotteries are legal. He found 61% played the lottery in the last year. So that's a pretty high number, right? Especially for people who really can't afford it. This is from a separate survey. This is a national survey. Household incomes below $13,000. So that's way down here. I mean, that's going to put you like 10, 15th percentile income-wise. They spend an average of $645 a year on lotto tickets, which makes it about 5% of their income. The question, who plays the lottery, is pretty obvious. It's people who can't afford to play the lottery. Somebody explain this. Why do you think this is who plays the lottery?
Because they are looking to get more money, so if they're low, then potentially.
Yeah, it's I think for the, it's hard to know exactly why, but it seems like this is their shot at being a multimillionaire, right? It's not, that's kind of what they've decided is their shot at becoming a multimillionaire.
I think there's also like generational training, and so if your family is like upper middle class, then your parents train you on how to make money and make a business. Whereas these families, no one ever trained them on how to make money, and so their only chance to make money is the lottery.
Good. I don't have a better answer than those answers. Those are good answers. So this was done. This is one state where they looked at who gambles, and this is the percentage of people earning over $40,000. So this state's relatively well off, and this is the percentage of the people who make under $40,000. But then you look at who are the high frequency lottery users, and you can see like over, more than half. So this small portion here who are making less than the rest of the people in the state, they're responsible for the bulk of high frequency lottery use. So just to kind of underline the point, it's relatively poor people who play the lottery. One other example, did a study in Chicago, and they went county, or they looked at different cities or areas within Chicago, and the two that had the highest, two with the highest unemployment were also the highest in lottery sales. So it's people who don't have jobs and who don't make a lot of money. This is who's playing the lottery. So the question, why? Why do people play the lottery? We'll talk about a couple of different reasons why. The first relates to the availability heuristic.
It's not a question. How do they know the income of all these people?
So typically, the survey would be how they would do it. In the case of the one in Chicago neighborhoods, they looked at plain rates and then unemployment rates in that zip code, for example. But most of the time, you know, it would be a survey type thing where you're asking somebody a couple questions. So I can back up and say, for this first one, this first number, this one that gives you bottom 20%, 61%, they called 5,000 people, and these are people who agreed to talk, to answer survey questions, and that's where they got those numbers. All right, so availability heuristic. I'm going to ask a couple questions. Who can give me 3 or 4 words that begin with the letter K? Roberto.
Keratin, knowledge, kite, kick.
Good. Can you give me 4 words with K in the 3rd position?
Ask, acknowledge, arc.
That's really good. I'm glad you tripped up after 3. If you'd gone 4 for 4, you would have ruined this example. Really good. So I've done this in class before, and usually, it's pretty easy to get K in the 1st position, right? Even yours were pretty highbrow. This, kick.
Knowledge.
Yeah.
Keratin.
Half the class is like, wait, what was that one?
But so the fact is that in actual use, there are more than twice as many words in English where K is in the 3rd position. So it's actually, that's more common, but it's harder to think of. And so if you ask people what seems more common, K in the 1st or K in the 3rd, K in the 1st, everyone thinks that's more common because it's easy to think of examples where K is the letter in the 1st position, right? But, so you get this disconnect, and the reason is it's the availability heuristic. The more readily something comes to mind, the more influence it has on the mind. So I'll give you a couple of examples, I think. If you're still copying this down. Whenever there's a dramatic plane crash, you see rates of air travel use declining, right? And it's not because air travel becomes more dangerous. It's because there's it's the availability heuristic. Right? There's a big fiery plane crash, and then it seems like it's more dangerous than it really is, right? When in fact, of course, everybody knows this, but per mile and per hour, driving is far more dangerous than flying in an airplane. But if there's an airplane crash, it's in the news, it's easy to think about, and so it has more of an impact on our thinking than it should. Any questions about the availability heuristic? Again, it's the idea that easier it is for something to come to mind, the more impactful it is on us. So plane crash is an example. Shark attacks are another example. It's really, really unlikely that anyone will be attacked by a shark, but when it happens, it's big news, and it's vivid, and it's dramatic. And so when there's a shark attack, people are less likely to go into the ocean. It's not because the ocean became more dangerous, it's just because, you know, this event that is easy to think about and readily comes to mind has a big impact on what we think.
Does it also take away our deniability?
Explain that.
Like, I know that sharks are in the water, but when I'm at the ocean, as long as I'm not thinking about it and I'm just denying the fact that there's sharks in the water, then I'm fine. But if anyone brings up a shark, then it's like, okay, I'll be on the beach watching you guys.
Yeah, so it's the fact that it readily comes to mind. It's not like if you were, given a multiple choice or true and false, sharks are in the ocean, true or false, that you get that wrong.
Yeah.
Right? You always know there's sharks in the water. It just has to do with the fact that once it readily comes to mind, it's really impactful on our behavior. And so when it comes to lotteries, the availability heuristic is such that it's easy to think about people who win. And in fact, this is kind of an interesting thing. Of all the states, I think, 46 states or 44 states, the vast majority of states have state-sponsored gambling. There's only 6 that allow you to remain anonymous. Why do you think that is?
The marketing.
There's no, if you can put somebody's name in a giant check and put them in front of a camera and in front of people, then the availability heuristic is activated, and it's easy to think, hey, look, I could be one of these guys with the big hat and the big check, right? And so this is why they make it almost impossible for you to stay anonymous. Most people who win the lottery much prefer to remain anonymous, right?
Yeah. Death threats.
What's that?
I heard like the death threats and everything that happens in the lottery.
Yeah, every bad thing you've ever done in the past is going to surface if you win the lottery, and everybody who thinks they're related to you or that they've done something nice to you, they're gonna appear. So obviously most people want to remain anonymous, but it detracts from the availability heuristic, right? It's good marketing for them to make it easy to think about winning the lottery, right? Whereas far more common are people who play and don't win, but that doesn't come to mind as readily, right? The long list of people who pay and don't win. It's like words with K in the third position. Way more common, just not as easy to bring to mind as these really bright, vivid examples. So availability heuristic helps understand why people would at least try it once, right? Which is that there's this idea that you could win, that's something that comes to mind easily and very vivid. And so that's gonna have a strong impact on our thoughts and actions. Doesn't explain repeat players. The lowest 20% of incomes average 26.1 days per year playing the lottery. So again, keep in mind, there's a lot of people who don't make money, who never play, right? A lot of people in this income area who don't play. So when you're averaging, you're taking, a lot of people who play are going to play a lot more than 26 times a year. That's how you get that average, right? Because you've got to incorporate a lot of zeros with it too to get to this average of 26.1 days. So these are people who play a lot. And how do we understand that? First of all, they're not all the Powerball. The Powerball, the way that works typically is you win or you lose, and there's not a lot of in between. But these the scratchies. Does anyone play the scratchies or has played the scratchies? Have you ever won with the scratchies?
Well, yeah, yes. Good.
Is that 3 times?
Yeah, out of 21 tickets for like the 21st birthday, right, just the dollar scratches, I won $33.
So you came out ahead.
I did.
So the lesson is you should all start gambling.
Better double down.
So a lot of gambling is this type of thing where there's lots of kind of small wins in the $30 range, $15, right? This one you could win up to $333. So the way to understand this high frequency playing is operant conditioning, also called instrumental conditioning. Does anyone know the famous psychologist associated with this? It's not Pavlov. Skinner? Skinner, yeah. So reinforcement is anything that strengthens the behavior that follows. So what's an example of a reinforcer? Something that strengthens the behavior that follows.
Food.
So I'm going to give you an example of a reinforcement. Academically, what's a reinforcement?
Good grade. Studying for a test.
Yeah, you get a good grade, right? So yeah, studying, yeah. So what's another example? Something, a paycheck, yeah. Right? You or a bonus, right? You do your job or you do your job well. And there's something that says, hey, do that again. That's a reinforcement. Punishment, anything that decreases the behavior that follows. What's academically, what would be an example of a punishment? Something that reduces the behavior that follows.
Academic probation.
Okay, good. Yeah. So you had a bad semester, and you're put on probation. Presumably, that should kind of change the behavior that follows. Could be too that maybe you study really hard for a test, then you get a bad grade on it, and you're like, what's the point? Right? That also be a punishment. So what's that?
Taking a class from a specific professor, and then you realize you don't ever want to take that professor again.
I hope you're not talking about me.
Definitely not.
Be super brave to do that.
Just call you out.
All right, so so it's not just, so we're going to talk, so there's reinforcers and there's punishers, but it's a little more complicated than that, because you can be reinforced or punished on either a fixed or a variable schedule. So a fixed schedule is every time that behavior occurs, you get a result, either a punishment or a reinforcer. So what's an example of a fixed reinforcement schedule? So we'll say fixed, so every time you perform that behavior, it's a paycheck is a good example, right? So every time you go to work, you get a paycheck. What's an example of a punishment where every time you perform it, there's a punishment?
Putting your hand on a hot stove, that analogy, every time you touch it, you're gonna get burned.
Yeah, good example. Yeah, they did so with rats or dogs or whatever. When they do these experiments, sometimes they'll electrify a part of the cage, and anytime the animal touches that, it gets shocked, and it learns really quickly to not touch, or not go on that part of the maze, for example. That would be a fixed reinforcement schedule. Go to work, get paid, push a lever, get a pellet. The second kind is variable ratio. This is where the behavior produces the result predictably, where you don't necessarily know what that ratio or what that's gonna be.
It used to be like eating gas station food in the evening.
Well, explain what you mean by that.
Well, probably 3 times out of 10 I get really sick after I eat gas station food after the evening. Just been sitting there all day.
Yeah, that is a good example. I feel like you should be going to Taco Bell or something, just so it's more consistent. The relationship between eating and getting sick is more consistent.
50-50.
Yeah. What's another example of a variable ratio schedule where what you do, the relationship is inconsistent with the punishment or the reinforcement? Stock market. Okay, that's good.
Studying through tests.
Yeah, that's a good example. Yeah, you can't always know in advance, what the relationship between effort and result will be.
Running stop signs.
Oh, that's a good example. Yeah, running stop signs. So you might be good, 9 times out of 10. All right. Here is our man, D.F. Skinner.
Can pigeons read? This one gives every indication, because it's been taught to distinguish between 2 words and to behave appropriately. He's learned his different response to each sign by being rewarded with food. So the bird isn't acting independently. Its behavior is shaped by controlling its environment. The first task was to isolate an individual piece of behavior and see how that could be changed. Skinner did this by keeping individual pigeons at about 3/4 of their normal weight, so that the birds were always hungry, and food could be used as an automatic reward. The pigeon was studied in a uniform box and quickly grew used to it. One piece of behavior, pecking a coloured disc, was measured on a graph. The pigeon learned that pecking the disc produced a reward. Then the behaviour of pecking could be studied in relation to how often that reward was offered. Or in Skinner's terms, what was the schedule of reinforcement?
The main thing is what we call schedules of reinforcement. Reinforcement is what Laban calls reward, and you can schedule it so that a reward occurs every now and then when a pigeon does something. We usually use a response with a pigeon pecking a little disc, a little spot in the wall, and you can reinforce with food, but you don't reinforce every time. Perhaps every 10th time, or perhaps only once every minute, or something like that. There are a very large number of schedules, and they have their special effects. There is a good example of how you can move from the pigeon to the human case, because one of the schedules is very effective with rats or pigeons is what we call a variable ratio schedule, and that is at the heart of all gambling devices and has the same effect. The pigeon can become a pathological gambler just as a person can. Now, the fact that we found that out with pigeons and could prove it by removing and changing the schedule makes it easy for it to interpret the case with the human subject. We don't say that the human subject gambles to punish himself, as the Freudians might say, or gambles because he feels excited when he does so. Nothing of the sort. People gamble because of the schedule of the reinforcement that follows, and this is true with all gambling systems. They all have variable ratios built into them. So what we've learned from the pigeon, it made it possible to interpret this vast field very effectively.
Where does that leave free will?
All right, so show you this. So the thing we need to understand next is this term extinction, which is once you've got this kind of relationship between behavior and rewards or punishments, What happens when you remove that? So what happens, say you're in the habit of studying for a test, and then your grade suddenly there's no relationship between whether you study or not and your outcome, either because it's always an A or always an F. How long would it take you to change your studying behavior?
Pretty quick.
Pretty quick, right? So another example would be, let's go with red here. We're gonna say this is fixed. Let's say that every time there's a behavior, you get the reward. And then at this point, we stop pairing the behavior with the reward. So, for example, let's say you've got a day laborer job where you show up and at the end of the day you get paid, right? That's the arrangement. And then suddenly there's no money anymore. How long is it going to take you to stop showing up? What's that? Yeah, exactly. The drop would be about like that, right? So here we're going to go with the variable ratio, same situation. But all along, it hasn't been consistent. So all along in this case, and the example, the perfect example is gambling, and you heard Skinner talking about this variable ratio. Maybe you get rewarded every third time the pigeon pecks on the little disc or whatever, or maybe it's every 12th time. But what you see is that the effects are really, really strong when it comes to extinction, right? It sort of more closely resembles that, which is if you've learned a behavior through variable ratio reinforcement, which is that it's always been inconsistent, then extinction rates are really, really, really slow. Meaning you keep at that behavior. So in the case of lottery, you might win occasionally, and that's the worst possible thing for you as far as spending your money, because that's a variable ratio reinforcement, which makes it really hard to overcome that reinforcement. Any questions about this, Rashawn?
So in the case of the birds, it was the hunger that drove them. What's the hunger in this? Like, why do gamblers continue to do it? I'm missing something here.
So let me talk about hunger for a second, because when I was an undergrad, I trained rats as part of this research project, and I had this one rat that I couldn't train, and the guy, the graduate student I was working with, he said, all right, well, we're going to put him on reduced food over the weekend, and we'll see how he does on Monday. And so they gave him half the food over the weekend, and then he was ready to learn, and he did a lot better after that. And we would reinforce with Fruit Loops too. That's like Fruit Loops. Yeah, and so anyway, I tried to introduce this idea to my wife in parenting. She got no time for that.
By feeding your kids.
Yeah, keep them hungry, and then they'll listen to you. So it's just the desire for money. I think that's as far as, and that's partly why it works for people who are poor. That's the people who are kind of hungriest for money, right? Are the people who are at sort of economically the lowest end. I guess you could say they're the hungriest for money. That's my best answer. I don't know if there's a better one, but.
I was just gonna say, I've got a friend who let him ski every single weekend, and like 1 in 10 times he'll win a big chunk of money, like a couple thousand. But that's 1 in 10 times. Every other time, he loses like $300 or $400. But he does it every single weekend just because he's so addicted, really. But he thinks he's gonna win $1,000 that next week.
Yeah, I went to Vegas with a buddy one time, and it was for New Year's Eve, and he just kind of disappeared, and I it's kind of started getting worried about him, because we had this hotel room, and and he didn't show up, and all night, next morning, he ended up sleeping in his car. Anyway, what happened was, it's kind of a good story. So he spent every penny in his checking account. And then, so he went to the concierge at whatever the casino we were at and said, hey, I'm tapped out on my checking account. Can you help me get access to my savings account? I got a savings account. I want to start using that. She said, yeah, here's a phone number. They'll help you. He took the number, he called it. It was Gamblers Anonymous. and at that point, he's like, okay, she might have. I thought that was kind of amazing that a casino would hand out a Gamblers Anonymous card. And that's when he's like, all right, maybe it's time to go home. And then he slept in the car. Out of shame. All right, so in one study with rats, they did, so with fixed ratio, so every time the rat hit the pellet, every time the rat hit the lever, it would get a pellet. It took 8 hours for total extinction. With a variable ratio, it took about 4 days. You can see that's a hard behavior to stop when the rewards are inconsistent.
So you're willing to do it more if you don't know the result history?
Yeah, if there's some, if not getting rewarded is part of how you learn the reinforcement schedule, then it makes it really hard to extinguish that behavior.
So with the variable ratio, would they completely stop the pellets and the rat would continue to push the lever for 4 days?
Well, on and off for 4 days, yeah.
But was it like varied still, but just less?
No, it was absolute, there was no more. So, one last little thing. All right, another comedian is going to take this topic on. There's this guy you may have heard of, Adam Carolla, and he does this bit that he's done for a long time called "What Can't Adam Complain About?" And the idea is you bring up something awesome, and he finds a way to complain about it. This is a long clip, but we've got time for it, and I think it's worth your while. So, there's actually, I'm going to just tell you ahead of time, there's one test question that comes from this rant. So, I don't expect you to take notes, but if you pay attention, you should be fine.
And not with a Y either. All right, let's see. Let's do one more. Let's talk to...
And I should probably have said this the last time. There's a language warning.
Ooh, Marcos?
Yeah, you can't complain about sports gambling.
Yes, I can complain about sports gambling. A, because I lost $9,000 to Dave Damashek last season. But B, because it should be legal. And this whole thing about gambling, and this whole thing about anything that's legal, imagine, as I've said many times, in order to shine some clarity on any topic you're talking about, I always just say, picture yourself talking to aliens or talking to people from 1,000 years in the future, if in fact we haven't killed ourselves with greenhouse gases. If I'm talking to aliens and they're saying, what is this gambling? I say, well, you get money and you get this and you make a guess and I do that. And they go, oh, all right, and is that legal or is that illegal? And you go, well, the part where you can go down in your house slippers, your bathrobe, and take your government check and hammer it and go wait in line and hope that you have a 1 in a billion chance of getting it. The stupid, retarded form of gambling known as the lottery, the one that ironically gives half the money to the school system, whereas everyone who supports it hasn't gotten past the 9th goddamn grade. It's the antithesis of the school system. Nobody educated gambles, but yet they still perpetuate this myth. That's fine. And the part where you go and you bet on the horses, That's fine. And the part where you go down to the City of Commerce and some guy from some part of Asia that you've never heard of says you can play Pai Gow Pan, whatever, and the only deal is you're not gambling against him, you're gambling against the house, but you got to do it standing up, and you have to break off a table leg and put in your keister. That's legal, but blackjack's not legal, but gambling on football isn't legal, except for you can do it if you cross this imaginary line in the desert. And he's gonna go, are you guys high? What are you talking about? You're going, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know why this form of gambling is bad or inherently evil, and that form of gambling is cool, and this is going to corrupt you, and this isn't, and this is going to ruin your children, and this is a slippery slope, and this is an addiction, and somehow playing the lottery isn't. The government sponsoring the dumbest, most retarded form of gambling, giving stupid people the worst message you can give stupid people, which is, hey, dummy, this is your only shot. You're never going to get out of that crappy apartment. You're never going to get off government assistance. You're never going to get an education. You're never going to get a skill. You're never going to be able to make your own way in this life unless the stars align and somebody smiles on you. That's your only ticket, loser. That is the worst message a government can send its constituency, yet it's the only legal form of gambling we have. And anytime anyone wants to know where the government's head's at, just think about the lottery. Just think about the hypocritical, corrupt mess. And by the way, the school systems, I see the news that the Super Lotto jackpot, whatever, is up to a record high. It's $500 million this week. So, of course, all of the tards get in a line around the block, and it takes me 45 minutes to buy a goddamn six-pack at the store. So all the idiots are going out because they're going to hit it big with the $500 million Lotto jackpot, whatever. Meanwhile, the next story on the next page of the newspaper is school systems crumbling. LA Unified especially, unusable. There's nobody I know that makes any money, that has any intelligence, that has a modicum of respect for their children, that would dream for a hot second, for a fleeting second, to send their kids to LA Unified School District. So evidently all this money you're raising for the school system is not working out, you hypocrites. Wow. Wow. Thank you. That was What Can't Adam Complain About? Anyone who buys a lottery ticket's an idiot. It's the worst message you can send to you, to your kids, to anyone. You are sending a horrible message to yourself when you buy a lottery ticket. You are saying, I'm a loser, I will never get out of this hole called life, yet this is my shot. I won't buy it just because I don't believe you should send horrible messages to yourself. Right.
Yeah.
You need to, you're really, in life, you're your own therapist, cheerleader, guidance counselor, motivator, trainer, sponsor. You're everything to you. And when your counselor, how would you like it, by the way, if your motivational counselor, your life coach, your school counselor, your whoever went out and bought lottery tickets? Or told you you should. Better yet, your school, yes, if you went to go talk to a guidance counselor and you said, look, I'm not sure what I'm good at, what do you think? And he said, here's $1. Go down to 7-Eleven and hope you're lucky, son. That is the worst message. Could you imagine if you were a guidance counselor, ironically working at somewhere in the LA Unified School District, which is unusable, but if you in fact, and they've just become parole officers now, but if you in fact were a guidance counselor and you told your students, go buy a lottery ticket, one guy came in, he was bound for Stanford, and you said, looking good, see you in Stanford, but the next guy came in and you said, buy a lottery ticket, you would be fired. Yeah. You would be fired for that advice. And the reason you'd be fired is because that would be a put down. You don't tell an 18-year-old kid to go out and buy a lottery ticket. You're best suited for lottery buying. Waiting in line in a house coat and slippers and scratching your ass.
There we go. So, moral of the story, don't send horrible messages to yourself. That's it.